On the vast grasslands of Kruger National Park in South Africa, the morning sun spreads evenly over the misty air, making the scene even more magical and peaceful. Passing through sparse trees and lush green bushes, Wandile, a young conservation officer, begins his daily patrol with a passionate heart and a deep love for nature. Since he was a child, he has cherished the dream of dedicating himself to protecting the wild world, and now Kruger National Park is the place where that dream comes true. Every time he sets out, he carefully checks his off-road vehicle, ensuring he has enough water, medicine, and spare medical equipment to respond promptly to any emergency situation. Along the way, he often stops to observe footprints on the ground, listen to the calls of birds, feel every breath of the earth and sky, and learn about the mysterious lives of all species. It was on such an early morning in the quiet space that he suddenly noticed a small blood stain on the dry grassland, causing a premonition of danger to rise in his heart. He stopped the car and quietly got out, tiptoeing along the drops of blood that had soaked into the weeds, anxiously wondering what kind of animal was injured and in need of help. After walking a short distance, he saw the majestic body of a male lion lying motionless, its golden fur stained with dried blood, tightly wrapped in sharp barbed wire. His heart pounded at the heartbreaking sight. Wandile approached very carefully, holding the medical kit in his hand, trying to stay calm so as not to frighten the lion. The wounded lion growled softly, looked up at him with lost eyes, and then, seemingly exhausted, lowered its head again, desperate and helpless before the barbed wire that dug deep into its flesh. Wandile quickly examined the wound, noticing that the wire had wrapped tightly around the animal's shoulders and back, causing several bloody cuts that required skillful and patient intervention. He knelt down, pulled out a pair of pliers from his tool bag, took a deep breath, and began to cut away the steel. He worked carefully, trying to calm the lion so that it would not rise up in fear. Sweat poured down his forehead and fell onto the dry grass, but he did not allow himself to stop, for the life of the king of the jungle was in his hands. The tense minutes passed slowly. The sound of the pliers cutting the steel rang out, mixed with the soft, painful groans of the wounded animal. When the last wire was removed, Wandile urgently applied antiseptic and a temporary bandage to limit infection. Despite the seriousness of the wound, the male lion, now free from the barbed wire, was still breathing heavily, trembling with fatigue, but his eyes began to show relief and gratitude. Wandile spoke a few soft words, naming him Jabari, which means brave in the local language, to commemorate this extraordinary moment. Carefully stepping back, he gave Jabari some space, observing whether the lion could stand up on his own after such serious injuries. Slowly the lion lifted himself up, staggered a few steps, then looked deeply into Wandile's eyes, as if wanting to remember the image of his savior. Under the early morning sunlight, Jabari turned and walked into the tall grass, leaving behind the shredded barbed wire and traces of blood still imprinted on the ground. That moment touched Wandile's heart, making him deeply aware of his mission to protect and accompany all living beings in the wild. A few weeks passed, and life returned to a steady rhythm. Wandile continued his patrols in his old off-road vehicle, wandering across the vast grasslands. One afternoon, when the sky was clear and calm, he caught a glimpse of a familiar figure in the distance, watching him across the golden grasslands. It was Jabari, the male lion he had saved, now somewhat recovered, quietly hiding behind the bushes, observing his every move with a calm gaze. Without any sign of threat, the lion simply followed, keeping a distance that would not cause uneasiness, as if to say that he had not forgotten the human friend who had saved his life. From that day on, Wandile was never truly alone on his patrols, for Jabari was often seen somewhere nearby, silently protecting him. Colleagues in the park began to stir when many reported seeing a large lion following Wandile's car on the red dirt roads. At first, everyone was worried, unsure whether it posed a potential threat. But Wandile simply smiled and said that Jabari was not a threat, but a friend. As time passed, everyone witnessed Jabari quietly following, never showing any signs of aggression. It seemed to have a special bond with Wandile. Once, when Wandile stopped the car in the tall grass to check the traces of an antelope herd, Jabari also stopped at a distance, patiently observing. When Wandile got back in the car and continued driving, Jabari slowly followed. This friendship between species spread throughout the park, making many visitors curious to learn more. Everyone was secretly happy to see the conservationist's kindness, reciprocated by nature. People began to call Jabari the wild guard of Wandile, admiring the magical bond between man and the king of the jungle. One evening after finishing his work, Wandile suddenly realized that Jabari was sitting on a high rock, looking at him as if waiting to send him home. The scene was so beautiful and sacred, two beings exchanging trust. As Wandal's figure disappeared behind the long dirt road, Jabari returned to his wild world. However, an incident occurred during the harsh dry season. A herd of angry wild elephants swept through the western part of the national park, destroying many trees and infrastructure. They seem to have lost control due to the hot weather, scarce water, and lack of food, making their behavior more aggressive and unpredictable. The national park management ordered the evacuation of tourists camping near the elephant herd, and Wandal immediately set out, determined to escort everyone to safety. Along the way, the roars of the elephants resounded loudly, drowning out the sound of the engines and making everyone's hearts tremble with fear. While hastily coordinating the group of tourists, Wandal accidentally got separated from his teammates. He found himself stuck on a low mound, surrounded by only reeds and a few broken tree stumps. The sound of the elephants' footsteps grew closer and closer, the ground shaking under their terrible power. He had nowhere to hide. Just when he was desperate, he heard a loud roar ringing in his ears, causing the elephants to stop for a moment. There was no mistaking it. It was Jabari. The majestic lion charged forward like an arrow, exuding the commanding aura of the king of the jungle. Jabari chose to attract the elephants' attention with continuous roars, standing in front of them and baring his fangs threateningly, despite the risk of being attacked by their sharp tusks and massive bodies. The elephants turned toward Jabari, roaring in defiance, but the lion did not retreat. He was buying time for Wandal to escape, both frightened and in awe. Wandal seized the moment and ran toward a high cliff, away from the path of the angry elephants. Meanwhile, Jabari majestically blocked their way, moving skillfully between their giant legs, sometimes dodging swinging trunks, sometimes roaring to assert his dominance. Even though he knew he could get hurt or worse, Jabari kept his distance from the elephants, preventing them from approaching Wandal. The roars of the elephants and the lion created a chaotic symphony, echoing across the dry forest, disturbing its usual stillness. Gradually, the elephants took notice of the fierce and fearless lion. Perhaps they were also exhausted after hours of running, for they slowly turned in another direction. When the last elephant disappeared, Jabari collapsed, gasping for breath, clearly drained from the tense confrontation. Wandal rushed to Jabari's side, his eyes filled with sincere concern for his special companion. He was deeply moved, realizing that his life had just been saved. Placing a trembling hand on the lion's mane, he whispered words of gratitude, feeling the king of the jungle's heart pounding with exhaustion. Fortunately, Jabari was not seriously injured, only bruised and tired, but what had just happened proved that he had risked his life to protect Wandal. After the elephants left, Wandal was able to contact his teammates. He carefully lifted Jabari into the car and slowly drove to the field veterinary station to check his wounds, his heart filled with gratitude. The entire reserve buzzed with excitement at the news of the lion saving a human. Everyone was amazed at Jabari's loyalty and bravery, the selfless sacrifice of a true guardian. He helped his benefactor. The National Park Management Board considers this a historical mark, recognizing the rare bond between humans and the iconic wild animals of this place. Jabari was cared for over a few days, gradually recovering. Although still weak, he looked toward Wandal every time he approached, as if to affirm that their friendship would never change. After the incident, Wandal cherished the male lion even more. Not only did he save it, but the lion also used its whole heart to repay him. On tourist information pages, people shared the story of the conservationist and the guardian lion, seeing it as living proof of a magical bond. Tourists visiting Kruger were curious to meet this duo, capturing rare photos of a relationship that transcended species boundaries. When Jabari healed, he returned to his territory, but he still kept an eye on the familiar figure, ready to appear whenever Wandal needed him. On every patrol, Wandal could feel Jabari's silent presence somewhere, like a quiet guardian of the vast grasslands. Memories of fighting together in times of danger, of the barbed wire that had been shredded, became beautiful marks between man and lion. Sitting by the campfire on windy nights, the conservation staff often spoke of the courageous journey of Wandal and Jabari, like a fairy tale in the jungle. When dawn broke, Wandal set off again in his familiar car, carrying the belief that despite the hardships ahead, he was not alone, for a loyal friend was always lurking somewhere. The morning grasslands were covered in a thin layer of mist, reflecting the silhouette of Wandal in his car, while somewhere, Jabari walked lightly on the damp grass, keeping his eyes on his human friend. They were symbols of kindness and mutual understanding, different species, yet in tune with the language of sharing and loyalty. Their stories spread throughout the national park, inspiring those who believed in kindness and the ability to blur the lines between humans and nature. Every evening, as the sky turned red at sunset, Wandal would glance into the distance, hoping to catch sight of the lion, a daily farewell ritual between two friends. One day, he saw Jabari sitting majestically on a rock, watching him until he left the park, then leisurely returning to his pride. The story of Wandal and Jabari has inspired generations of conservationists, encouraging them to work hard for wildlife safety. Though the world outside remains full of challenges in Kruger, this cross-species friendship continues to grow, proving that wild instincts can harmonize with kindness. Throughout his journey, Wandal reminded himself to keep an open heart, believing that one day, anyone could find magical companions in nature. The scars on Jabari's shoulders, remnants of the barbed wire, became symbols of faith and gratitude, connecting the fates of two creatures that seemed destined to remain apart. Through the changing seasons, Jabari and Wandal occasionally met, sharing wonderful, quiet moments. Wandal never forgot the first time he touched the lion's mane, between fear and love, when his courage guided him to do what seemed impossible. On gravel roads, marked by the footprints of herbivores, people sometimes saw Jabari's bright yellow eyes following Wandal's figure, quietly and warmly. The memory of the ferocious elephant herd years ago reminded him of the moment of life and death, of the great sacrifice Jabari made for him, giving him the motivation to continue his conservation work. People were amazed and applauded every time they heard about the lion that saved a man. They admired even more the young conservationist's kindness and extraordinary courage. From that moment on, whenever Wandal heard the familiar roar, his heart would beat faster, as if an invisible thread connected two souls, even though they were not of the same species. One evening, as the workday ended, he recalled his long journey with Jabari, feeling the simple yet profound happiness that nature bestowed. He still believed that in every blade of grass swaying in the wind and every cloud drifting in the sky, Jabari was present, watching and protecting in his own way. That belief kept him moving forward, cherishing every life in Kruger National Park. Knowing he was never alone. Like a beautiful anecdote, their story resonated far and wide, making people realize that even amidst danger, love and compassion can shine. As a new day dawned, Wandal prepared for his next journey, carrying gratitude for life and a warm smile, waiting for another reunion with Jabari on the endless grasslands. Amidst the majestic natural scenery, he looked toward the horizon, where the first rays of sunlight filtered through the clouds, knowing for sure that somewhere, Jabari was watching over him. The seemingly harsh wild world still held miracles, like the extraordinary friendship between humans and the king of the jungle. Day by day, they continued to write a story of courage, sincerity, and love, warming the hearts of many travelers to Kruger. After all, Wandal understood that sometimes a single act of kindness is enough to create a miracle, and he had proven it in his own life. Whenever he remembered rescuing the lion, he could never forget Jabari's grateful eyes, nor could he have imagined that from that moment they would become soulmates who transcended all boundaries. He smiled as he closed each day, thinking of the roar that echoed somewhere in the night, a sign that Jabari was safe and sound, keeping their sacred bond alive in the wild.